All right, we'll get started. But again, thank you so much for joining me today. I am really excited to be presenting on this topic today. So welcome to Recruiting Like a Tech Giant. For those who haven't met me before, my name is Emily. I am a Senior Recruitment Consultant specialising in technology and product here at Hunt & Co. So Hunt & Co, we're a digital recruitment agency based just off James Street in the Valley, and we specialise in everything digital and technology. So whether that is your marketing, your sales, your digital product, UX, UI, and of course tech, we do cover it all. So if you ever need any help, feel free to reach out and I can point you in the right direction. For me personally, before I was at Hunt & Co, I was actually in internal recruitment. So I spent just over 2 years at CanStar doing the internal recruitment function there. And I think over my time at CanStar, I hired about 80 people in 2 years. So it was a pretty high volume role with lots of tech going on. Yeah, it was a really great role and I really loved that role. I'm also studying at She Codes at the moment, so I'm learning to code myself, and the course covers HTML and CSS. We went into Python. I'm currently doing Django and really crawling through Django, and then next we move on to React as well. So that's a sort of full stack development course. And for me personally, I'm a lover of big tech. So when I was studying my HR degree in uni, one of the things that I sort of thought I might do with my HR degree is actually be a recruiter for Google. And it was sort of around the time the internship, the movie was out as well. So that's probably an indication of the why behind that. But yeah, here I am recruiting in tech as a sort of a loop around to see how that happens. So yeah, that is a little bit about me. I wanted to start off with a bit of a disclaimer on the content that you're going to receive today. I have done my best to do really thorough research into the companies that I'm presenting today around their recruitment processes, what makes their hiring process a little bit different, and everything about the company in general. I will say that, like your own organizations, these companies are living, breathing organisms. So while the information may have been accurate at the time, there's a good chance that their process may be slightly different depending on the different roles that they're recruiting for. But I think to a good extent, it's still a great starting point to learn about the companies, what they're doing and why they're doing their processes the way they are. In terms of what we'll run through today, I'm going to take you through 8 tech giants in the Australian and global tech market. I'm going to run you through their processes and why their processes are structured the way they are, and really digging into what's important to them from a recruitment perspective. After that, I'll provide you with some things that we can leave behind from their processes that I think, are a bit redundant in the way that you're recruiting in your businesses, assuming that they're sort of, anything from startup to scale up to sort of large enterprise businesses here in Australia. And then I'll also run you through what you can take from those businesses and some, I guess, my top 10 tips for you to take away from today. So I think it's a great idea to take what you want from this presentation. It might just be that you pick up one thing that one organization is doing that you think is really helpful and interesting, but it could also be a case that you think, oh, what we're doing is actually working for us, and that's fine as well. So take what you want and leave behind the rest is totally okay. But to start with, I would love to share with you my 8 tech giants. So who are my tech giants? Having a look at these businesses, you can probably recognize them from just the logos alone. And I think that's probably pretty telling about what makes a tech giant. It's companies that we're using every day in our everyday lives, and that they're recognizable and big brands that people are wanting to work for. I just picked 8 today. I've picked 6 from the sort of international market. And the reason why I picked these 6 companies is because they're either doing interesting things, they've got good brand reputation in terms of recruitment, or they're sort of going to be impacting the Australian recruitment market, whether that is currently or in the future as well. So that's why I picked those 6. And then you can probably recognize on the left, we've got Atlassian and Canva. I did also want to touch on those companies because there's a good chance if you are recruiting in tech in Brisbane at the moment, and you've got a tech team in your business, there's a good chance that someone from your tech team in the last 18 months has moved over to either Atlassian or Canva. They're making sort of big waves in remote work and being able to hire from anywhere. So yeah, that is my 8 tech giants today. And I think it's important to recognize, why do we care about these companies? I think there's so much noise out there in terms of what's going on in the tech space, but really drilling down as to why we care about what these companies is doing, I think is important for this context of this presentation. So in a post-COVID world, the global demand for technology has significantly increased over the last 18 months to 2 years now. And that has come with a demand for talent. And then on top of that, we've also got a talent shortage going on. So here in Australia, we've got no skill migration. Remote work is a thing that's happening, which means that tech giants are now broadening their talent pools away from their headquarters, which is predominantly in the US. And now they're sort of hiring from cities like Brisbane, which means that not only are you competing with companies that are down the road from you or across the river from you, you're now competing with companies that are headquartered in California as well. So it makes it a really hard market. I think in terms of other insights for Australia at the moment, unemployment is sitting at an incredibly low 3.9% right now. And on top of that, just this week alone, there's currently just shy of 4,500 jobs for developers alone in Australia. And if you think about that, we've got really low unemployment and then we've got a lot of jobs out there. So being able to reconcile those two is just a bit of a nightmare, because you're looking for people who are really either settled in roles, have recently moved into roles, and are not looking to move. And at the same time, we've also got stuff going on in the US with venture capital firms, which has resulted in redundancies happening within those smaller startups and scale-ups, which means that people are becoming more risk averse to those smaller businesses and being drawn into your big tech giants, where they do have the stability to hold and maintain the employment of those people. So I think there's a couple of factors there, but that's, I guess, the why behind why I wanted to present this topic. I think it's really interesting and really timely at the moment, for sure. But why would your employees or the candidates that you're trying to attract, why would they want to work at a tech giant? And there's hundreds of reasons as to why, and I think it's all very individualized depending on the person. But I pulled together a couple of different reasons as to why. So I'll let those all come up. And I also should say, happy for you to, if you've got questions, happy for you to put them in the chat and I can answer them at the end. And yeah, we'll go from there as well. So these are my whys, the sort of brainstorm I've done as to why someone would want to work at a big tech giant. And I pulled out a couple of insights around that. So the first one I wanted to talk about was around adventure. And it's something that someone said to me as I was going through a bit of a screen with them to look for a new job. And they said, in my next role, I want adventure. And I think it was something really interesting at the time that I didn't really expect. You sort of go, money, flexibility, working from home, that sort of thing, but you never really sort of hear adventure. But I think it does summarize what these tech giants have on offer. It's about knowing that the company you're working for isn't going to be that same company in the next 2, 5, or 10 years. And I think if you think about Facebook, that's a great example of a company that has shifted and changed over the last 10 years. If you go back 10 years, it wasn't called Facebook. It was called Facebook. It wasn't called Meta. So they've had a name change in that 10-year time period. And they've also acquired different businesses. They've changed their model and they're doing really innovative and different things even still today as they were 10 years ago. So you think about adventure, it also gives you longevity in terms of where you're heading. Thinking about career opportunities and career progression, I think in terms of what that means, with a company that has so much scope and scale, like a big tech giant, you've got opportunities for growth within your own career inside that company itself. So whether that is moving laterally or vertically or horizontally as well. And at the same time, you've also got opportunities for growth outside a company. So we're seeing it quite a bit now with candidates who are starting to come on the market from places like Atlassian. If you've got that Atlassian logo on your resume, it's a pretty clear indication that you've had some great training and development from a technical standpoint, from that software development lifecycle point of view through your career so far. And it means that there's an attraction pull from other companies in the ether who want to be talking to the best of the best. And, you know, there is a perception that something like an Atlassian or a Canva or a Google are developing really quality software engineers. And I think that also comes down to the process that you have to go through to get into one of those businesses, which we'll touch on today, but I think it's a good reminder of going through a process that can be tough, gives an indication of what sort of developer you are to be able to go through that process. And it's a bit like piggybacking. You piggyback onto someone else's process and you hope for the best. The next one I want to talk about is perceived clout and status. So this is a bit like the barbecue factor. So you go to a barbecue, you're talking to people, they say, where do you work? And you say, I work at Google. And then from there, there's a whole range of conversations and directions that can go in. And I think people like the idea of being recognized for where they work and for that perceived status as well. So again, knowing that all of these tech giants have quite challenging and difficult processes to go through, it's a good indication that, you know, you're the best and the brightest in the field if you're working in there. So that's around that perceived status and clout. And I think the last one I wanted to mention was just around working on a product that we as a society use every day. So I guess if you think about it from this sort of example, you know, last night I was watching Stranger Things on Netflix while scrolling on my iPhone, looking on Airbnb for accommodation in New Zealand for a trip I'm going on in December. At the same time, I'm going through Google to really, you know, find different places in New Zealand I might want to visit. And then this morning I get to work, I'm creating some Canva graphics for a project I'm working on. At the same time, I'm uploading a Trello board for the same project. And then, you know, later on, I go log on to Amazon to buy some phone chargers that are going to be delivered to me tomorrow. So I think that's a great example of how just one person can use every single one of those companies in a 24-hour period. So there's that part of it. I think people want to work for companies where they really care about what it is that they are developing. And the best way to do that is to use the product that you are developing. So that's, I guess, some of the reasons as to why these companies are a good point of attraction. So let's dive in. So what I'm going to go through is each of these 8 companies. I'm going to tell you a little bit about their process generally and what's sort of interesting or different about them. And then off the back of that, I'll show you their sort of end-to-end life cycle of recruitment. I think one of the most interesting things that I found during my research on this topic is that there's actually not a lot of differentiation between these 8 companies and their recruitment process. So it probably goes to show there is a standard that is, you know, widely accepted as a way to get people from A to B and to be able to assess them quite clearly. But it also means that because this sort of process is quite consistent, there's definitely ways that you as a business owner or as a recruiter yourself can make your business process a little bit different to differentiate yourself and to be able to move it at a quicker speed or a more thorough speed than what we're seeing in market at the moment. So to start off, let's have a chat about Netflix. So Netflix is a really interesting example. And I was recommended a book by Harold, who's actually on the call as well, a couple of years ago, and it was No Rules Rules, which is all about the Netflix culture and the why behind what they do. And it was a super interesting read, and it really sort of dug into Netflix as a culture and why it's so different. I would definitely recommend having a read of that to sort of really dig down into it. But the culture itself has really influenced the way that they hire. So one of the things that they do, which is quite influential, is around paying top of market. And what that means is that if you are working for Netflix, you know that you are being paid at the very top of market. They do consistent research to know what market is paying, and they are offering that salary to all of their software engineers with X number of years experience. What this means is that you're not having that conversation of I'm worth this or I'm worth that, or this person over here has got that. They're happy to consider that data, take it on board and pay top of market. It does mean that it's really hard to, you know, compete with that if you're in market and that's a, you know, another offer on the table. But it's just, I guess, a good thing to note. Netflix, like many other companies within this space, they actually don't have a tech stack requirement. So they've obviously got their tech stack that they use and, you know, have to support their product. But if you are coming into the business for a role with Netflix, there's no requirement that you do that, have knowledge of that tech stack, but rather they're looking for people who have got good, solid skills and experience that are able to understand the why behind the technology, understand the logic and the process behind getting from A to B. And the logic behind that is that you'll be able to pick up something new with relative ease because you understand the syntax and that sort of thing that's going on behind it. They don't take on grads and interns, and they are recruiting with assumed knowledge. So in my research of some of the interview questions that they actually ask, there is a fair bit of assumed knowledge of the Netflix culture. So things like radical candor and transparency are part of the interviewing questions. So it's probably assuming that if you're going for a job at Netflix, you know what the culture's like, you understand what they're trying to achieve, and you probably read the book. If I'm completely honest, that's sort of the way that the questions read. And they also, what I thought was really interesting is they focus on centralized hiring with pivot points. So if you enter the Netflix process and the role that you're going for doesn't align with who you are as a person, but you could fit somewhere else in the business, Netflix will make a conscious effort to pivot out of the that sort of process and put you into a role that makes more sense for you. So that's Netflix, and this is their process. So it's a lengthy process. There are a lot of touch points, but it is quite standard across these tech giants. So they start off with a recruiter pre-screen. They then go through a hiring manager screen. These are both generally done by phone. You then have a technical round, and it's a bit of a choose your own adventure. So you can either do a take-home assessment or a 1 hour technical discussion with someone that would be in your team. And then off the back of that, they invite you on site for an interview, which includes 7 on-site interviews across 2 sessions. So quite a lengthy process. And I think if you get through that, you definitely deserve the job. But that's just how they do it. So that's Netflix. I think that's really interesting. Next up, we've got Google. And yeah, as I mentioned, I wanted to work for Google when I was in uni. They've got a really incredible reputation from a recruitment standpoint and from, I guess, an environment perspective as well. So these big tech giants, they've got these campuses where there are bikes and there's cereal dispensers everywhere and everything is free on site. And I think part of that is around how can we get these people to stay at work longer and work harder. But it's also about creating an environment that you want to come to every day. For Google, they use 4 different criteria when they're looking to bring on new recruits. So that is how the candidate thinks, their leadership skills, role-related knowledge, and Googliness, which is about culture fit. And I'm sure you have got some concept of what an interview question at Google is like, but contrary to popular belief, they no longer use those abstract, curly questions. But I did want to show you an example of one of those questions.
I'm Benjamin.
Allison, we're going to ask you a few questions that some of our candidates find a little bit odd.
Let's go.
No judgment, shoot.
You're shrunken down to the size of nickels and dropped to the bottom of a blender. What do?
You take her flat on your back like
You
this.
just lay back, enjoy
stick
that
as the floor, light
breeze,
as a feather,
pretend it's a fan.
and let those
Okay,
bad
got it.
legs whip all around you like this. It's like getting an MRI.
Once this blender's on, it's on forever.
It's on.
Respectfully, I got to disagree. We sold blenders, and even the best model in the world is only going to run maybe 10 or 11 hours. So we're getting out, and when we do, we're better off for it because whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
It's not so much getting out of the blender, it's what happens next. That's the question.
You've got 2 nickel-sized men free in the world. Think of the possibilities.
I mean, I on top of my head, and I'm just
My
going
head's
here.
swimming.
Sunglass repair? We'd be hell on those little screws.
Maybe stick us in those submarines that they put in people's bodies to fight diseases.
Okay, that's not a real thing, the submarines.
No.
Wait a minute. I thought we were stuck in a blender. Now we're saving lives? What?
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 I think it's really funny. Me personally. I hope that sound was okay. But if not, I'll send you the link. It's a good watch. And I watched The Internship this week again. It holds up. It's a great movie. It's a feel-good one. Would recommend.
I'm Benjamin.
Allison, we're going to.
Moving on. That's not the questions that they ask anymore. So previously they were doing really abstract questions that, there was no answer for. But instead they've moved on to questions that are probably more likely to occur than being shrunk down to the size of a quarter or a nickel and stuck in a blender. Instead, they're using questions that are sort of real life orientated. So the top one, there's actually a really great YouTube video online about how to approach this question from Google themselves. But the question is, imagine you're in charge of organizing a grand opening event of a new Google office. How would you plan this event? What I found really interesting about this question is, off the top of your head, it feels like something that's quite achievable to answer. You would talk through hiring a venue, hiring food, or organizing catering, I guess, and invite list, and what the entertainment is going to be. But in terms of how Google want you to answer that, that's not the way they want you to answer it. It is actually quite detailed in terms of the structure of the question. They want you to ask a lot of questions to get a lot of qualifying information. And I think what that sort of showed me was that these questions, they're pretty much like sheep and wolves in sheep's clothing, in terms of they're a bit of a disguise for actually being quite similar to that sort of blender question as well. So I think everything is not as it seems, but it's nice that they're trying to make it more approachable, I think. The intention behind these questions is to test your cognitive ability and your problem solving skills. So I think if you think about Google as a company and why they're so successful, it is because they've got the best and brightest in the building when it comes to problem solving and being able to bring ideas to life. So yeah, that's Google. I personally have used a similar Googly style question in my internal recruitment career, and it's something I'll bring out in the office every now and again as well. And I'm going to take you through that now as, I guess, an alternative to how you could bring in a question like this into your own hiring process. And I'll take you through it in a little bit of detail, but I also won't give away all my secrets. If you want to know more about it, reach out and I can run you through what the sort of ideal answer is. But the question is, I'm going to give you a task and it's your responsibility to finish that task from start to finish. So I'm going to give you 1,000 pieces of paper, 1,000 envelopes, and 1,000 pieces of string. I need you to fold the pieces of paper, put them in the envelopes, and tie a piece of string around each envelope. You have 1 week to complete the task. How do you approach it? If you have ever worked with me, or if I have hired you before, there's a good chance I have asked you that question. And the thing I really like about this question is that there genuinely is no right answer, but there is a better way to approach the question than if, there is just giving the answer. So some people, when they approach this question, they get really stuck on that time approach. So how much time do I have? How am I going to get that done? I need to outsource, or I need to bring people into the process. Whereas some people will get caught up on the idea that I'll need to automate that, or I'll need to invent a machine to get that done. So it's a good question on where do people get stuck? What sort of information do they take on? What questions do they ask? And there is no wrong answer. Although one time I did have someone say, oh, I just find the perfect playlist and I put the playlist on and then I would just go for it, which was not the intended outcome, but, shows creativity and a different way of thinking for sure. But if you want to know more about that question, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to take you through it in a bit more detail. So this is the Google process. Again, pretty similar. They've got a recruiter pre-screen, a first round interview, which is with the recruiter as well. And then off the back of that, they've got the general cognitive ability interview, which is their signature interview. It's broken up into 2 halves. You've got behavioral and technical questions in part 1, and then you've got that hypothetical and situational questions in part 2, which is where those interesting Google questions come from. Next up, we are moving on to Airbnb. So Airbnb, the reason why I included Airbnb is because they recently changed their policy to be able to work from anywhere. And what happened there was they were originally getting 15,000 applications a month. And then off the back of announcing that candidates could work from anywhere within the US, you have to be US resident for tax purposes, but you could work anywhere. They had 800,000 people visit their careers site after that announcement. So pretty huge, impact off the back of that. Why I thought that was interesting is because I think once Airbnb work out how, from a tax purpose or from an organization perspective, to allow people to work from anywhere in the world, I do think that will have an impact on hiring here in Australia and Brisbane as well. So that's why I thought it was an interesting sort of case study into hiring at the moment. They describe their process as rigorous and fun, which I think we'd all love to describe our processes as rigorous and fun. And similar to, I guess, other tech giants within this suite of tech giants, they do have an expectation that all Airbnb employees or candidates are also users of their product. So whether that is you are looking at properties on Airbnb as someone who wants to stay there, or if you're a host yourself. So that's just sort of, I guess, their ethos towards recruitment. In terms of their process, so they go through a pre-screen interview with a recruiter, a coding challenge via HackerRank, which is an online portal, a telephone technical screen, which can either be 1 or 2 separate interviews, and then an on-site interview, which is usually 4 to 6 interviews covering off company culture and technical abilities as well. So that's Airbnb. Meta. In my research, I think of all the companies who sell their work environment the best, it's Meta. I want to work for Meta. I think, yeah, they've got so much going on. The office looks amazing. And yeah, it's me. I want to work there. Their hiring is pretty insane. So still to this day, they're hiring about 10,000 new people every year, which if you drill down is about 200 people a week. And I know when I was onboarding people, how much of a struggle it was to onboard 1, 2, or 5 people a week. I can't imagine doing it with 200, but I think what that goes to show is that it is possible. And there is so much that goes on behind the scenes in terms of creating process and procedure to make that happen. We love a process and procedure. So yeah, really interesting. When a new employee comes into the Facebook building, they actually go through a 6-week boot camp. So that's about understanding all of the products within the Meta suite. I'm getting confused. It is Meta, it's not Facebook. All of the products within the Meta suite and understanding what they do and how they fit into the ecosystem. And then off the back of that, every new employee that comes into Meta is actually allowed to choose where they work. So there's obviously products underneath the Meta umbrella. So you've got Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, and there's a couple of others under there as well. And what that means is that each department actually has to pitch to the new employees about their department and why you want to work there. So it's a bit flipped on its head in terms of that selling piece. But yeah, it's super interesting. And I think it gives the candidate ownership over what they're doing and feeling like they've chosen to work there and it's, you know, the best option for them. But it also means that you've got employees who are dedicated to the product and really engaged as well. And yeah, in terms of their interviewing style, they do have 3 parts of their sort of technical style of interview, and they've just given them names. So Ninja, Pirate, and Jedi for each of the separate parts, which is interesting and something a bit different. But I think they do have quite strong branding from an internal perspective in terms of what things are called and that's as well. So this is their process. They've got a recruiter pre-screen, recruiter phone screen, a technical phone screen, and then off the back of that, they've got on-site interviews, which are covering off those sort of 5 areas. So technical project retrospective, where you talk through a project that you've worked on in the past, architecture and system design, program sense, which is around project management, project management, partnerships, so stakeholder management, leadership and collaboration, so more around teamwork as well. So Apple is one of the biggest companies in the world, I think, on LinkedIn. So these employees must just be their employees on site, or I guess in the technical side of things. If you include retail, I think their employee numbers goes up to about 500,000 people, which is pretty insane. So they focus on the 3 E's of Apple recruitment. So that's around experience and understanding there's a difference between expertise and experience. They don't expect you to be an expert, but they expect you to have experience. Ease, so they want to feel like you are at ease when you're interviewing, making sure that you're comfortable in the environment that they're presenting you with and that you're not overthinking it. And employability, so looking at demeanor, character, and culture fit for success in the business. Apple. Again, process is recruiter screen, technical phone screen, and then an on-site interview. What I found really interesting about that is to move from the technical phone screen to the on-site interview, sometimes there's a wait time of up to 2 weeks, which just feels a bit insane. And within that 6-hour meeting that you will do at Apple, you'll meet between 8 and 15 people, which is a lot of names to remember in that process. Excellent. And something I found interesting about Apple is that where Google has moved away from those really abstract questions, Apple still embraces them. So this is an example of a question that Apple still asks today in their process. Is a coconut a fruit? Which would throw me. And the reason behind why they do it is they're looking to replicate the unpredictable nature of working in an Apple store or in an environment that is within the corporate sort of Apple structure. And I have done the research. A coconut is a fruit. It has a specific name or a type of fruit, but it is a fruit. But if I had to answer that question, I would say, no, it's not a fruit. It doesn't have a seed, but it does have a seed. It's caused a lot of spiraling for me over the last 48 hours. Amazon. Amazon is quickly becoming one of the most desirable employees for college graduates in the US. And one of the things they've done recently is actually remove their sort of preferred colleges that people have to go to be accepted into Amazon. They're now sort of quite open, which has really opened up their talent pool in the US. And Amazon has got quite a big presence here in Australia as well. So I know there's teams here in Brisbane, but also all over Australia working on not only AWS, but also Amazon specific products, like their grocery division, I think has a big presence here in Australia as well. Amazon has a huge focus on their leadership principles. There's 14 Amazon leadership principles. And if you're interviewing with Amazon, you're expected to know all those leadership principles and how they relate to you as a person. And they've also got quite a big emphasis on answering questions within the STAR methodology. So that's situation, task, and I've forgotten the AR, but it's around outcomes as to what you did and how you got the outcome. Decisions are made by 2 people, so the hiring manager and the bar raiser. And it's a question that they ask, which I think is super interesting and something that, like, it's so logical in the way it's approached. I just think, yeah, it's brilliant. But is the person that you're interviewing better than 50% of the current employees in the same role? And if you think about that, if you keep doing that and every person that comes into the business is 50% better than the bottom 50%, you're only going to keep building and growing as a high-performing team and get more and more high performers in the business. I would say that it probably does make it challenging after a while or sort of immediately to hire if everyone's got to sort of hit that mark, particularly if you're, really trying to find employees quickly. But at the same time, I think it's a really interesting approach to hiring for sure. So the Amazon process, they have a recruiter pre-screen, an online technical assessment via HackerRank again. They've got phone interviews and they also have the loop. So that is 4 to 6 interviews, which includes an interview with that bar raiser as well. So let's jump into our homegrown heroes. So yeah, as I mentioned at the top, if you have a tech team based here in Brisbane, there's a good chance that someone that you know in that tech team has gone to work at Atlassian or Canva. And there's a couple of reasons behind that, but let's jump into their process and we can go through that as well. So I really love Canva's approach to recruitment. And if you don't follow, I think it's Amy Schultz, who's their head of talent at Canva, I would definitely recommend doing that because she's got some amazing insights into how they do what they do. And she's also on a lot of podcasts that you can listen to and get insights as to their process as well. But in terms of Canva, I think it's quite evident from Canva as a company that they're quite young in terms of tech giants based here in Australia and overseas as well. So being founded in 2012, compared to something like Apple that was founded in the 70s, they probably haven't had to do as many iterations of their recruitment process as an older company has, which means that they have really, drilled down into what makes a great candidate experience and building a process around that. I think the hardest thing to do in recruitment, if you're in internal recruitment, is to actually rebuild your process. I've tried to do it before with not much luck, because as you can imagine, if you've got a hiring process happening at the same time you're trying to rebuild something too, the two just don't align. It makes it really hard. So I think that's the beauty of Canva, is they've got a beautiful process because of being able to build it from scratch quite recently. So Canva, from a candidate perspective, focus on peak moments. So they want to make sure that if a candidate is going along a journey, there are particular peak moments in their sort of perspective. So whether that is when you get an offer, they'll send you out this sort of custom Spotify playlist that essentially spells out a message to welcome you to Canva, and you can go and find that on Spotify. It's quite easy to find. Right through to, if you are unsuccessful, what does that message look like? The focus around that is around pipelining for the future. So if this candidate is not quite right for this process, they might be right in a year's time or 2 years' time. So their process is to send a candidate away happy that they've been through the Canva process and that they've been able to, succeed in terms of finding something in 2 years' time or whatever that looks like. Canva really focus on diversity, and I thought this was really interesting. One of the things that they do is remove unnecessary degree requirements. I think we can all sort of agree that software developers with degree requirements is quite no longer a necessity anymore. So removing that really opens up your talent pool and makes it more inclusive. And on top of that, by limiting exclusionary language, so things like guru and rockstar from job descriptions does also open up your talent pool a bit more and makes it more appetizing for people to apply. Having read that this week, that sort of statement around those phrases like guru and rockstar, it's amazing how much they pop up in job advertisements at the moment. So I think with that in mind, it could be something to take away of looking at your diversity and inclusion. And I know Work 180 does a great job at being able to provide insights into how your job ads stack up with sort of exclusionary language. There's lots of resources there. I'd recommend having a look at Work 180 if you need some guidance on that. And yeah, also providing workshops for hiring managers to ensure that they're sort of all across unconscious bias and how to mitigate bias in recruitment processes to end up with a more diverse team. Canva's process is pretty straightforward. So you've got a recruiter interview to start with, then you move into a choose your own adventure technical test. So whether that's a pair programming or online code challenge by something like HackerRank. And then off the back of that, they've got a final interview, which includes both technical and cultural elements as well. And Atlassian. So some crazy stats for Atlassian. They are looking to hire an additional 5,000 Australian employees over the next few years. That's probably the next 5 years, which will take their total Australian presence to about 7,000 employees. If we think about 5,000 employees over the next 5 years, in theory, that's 1,000 employees a year. And if we break that down by state, it means that there's a significant portion of employees that are going to be coming from Brisbane businesses and Brisbane or Australian businesses and going to Atlassian, which is a really hard thing to comprehend when we're trying to attract talent in what is an already really challenging environment. Atlassian has had huge success when it comes to their work from anywhere policy. And at this stage, around 25% of their Australian workforce is in a remote location. So that's sort of outside a major capital city, which is interesting. So something to consider as to whether, if you're having trouble finding talent, can you open up to considering remote talent as well. So their recruitment process, a little bit longer than others that we've seen in market at the moment. But you've got a recruiter pre-screen, a phone interview with the hiring manager, you've got a take-home technical challenge, an on-site interview. And what they've done with their on-site interview is tried to make it as closely aligned to what it would actually be like to be in an office. So it means that your recruiter or hiring manager is showing you what a day in their life would look like via sort of video or VR or whatever sort of tools they're able to use. And also doing a bit of a virtual office tour during that process as well. And then off the back of that, they also go through to a final interview. So 5 processes all at once. All right, so that's my 8 companies all wrapped up in terms of their processes and what they do. That was a lot of information, so I hope you found some of that useful or interesting. Yeah, because I know there's a lot there. But I guess as a summary, what do we know to be true based off all of that information? So we know that these companies have large inbound talent pools. There is a huge availability of information out there. If you Google any of these companies in their hiring process, you can find the exact interview questions that they might ask or the style of interview question that they'll ask. You can find information on what people found the process to be like, whether they had a good experience, bad experience. It's all out there to read. We know that they have robust internal talent teams. So with your sort of tech giants in the US, I would say that their talent teams would be in the thousands, hundreds or thousands. And I know Atlassian and Canada would have significant talent teams as well. And that helps them do what they do in terms of the volume that they're trying to recruit for. They've got quite impressive PR machines. So I think with any of these companies, there's a good chance that you would be able to name the majority of the CEOs of those companies, if not someone else in the business who's got, you know, a big sort of presence around them. And I think that's really interesting. That comes down to the PR point of view, where these CEOs have books written about them and they've got movies made about them. They're on podcasts and TV shows, and, you know, they're doing all sort of different things. And I think even if you think about like the homegrown companies that we've got, so Atlassian and Canva, we know that Mike Cannon-Brookes has really invested in renewable energy and has an 11% share in AGL. We know Melanie Perkins has got also a strong ethos around sustainability and, you know, has a beehive on the top of the Canva office as well. So that's all about PR and how they're being positioned in market. There's a focus on candidate experience. So making sure that in all these processes, it comes back to the robust internal talent teams, but because they've got robust internal talent teams, they can really care and foster for their candidates. All of these processes have multiple parts in their process, and they've also got an employer brand focus. So they've all got careers sites where you can read about what the culture's like, and really see yourself working there. And, you know, there's the videos of the office with the bikes riding around and the skateboards in the office and that sort of thing too. Largely, we saw they've all got a similar process as well. So it goes to show that there's not a lot of differentiation when it comes to tech giants and how they run their processes. Pretty much there will be some sort of screen at the beginning, some sort of technical component, and some sort of interview that will have multiple people joining in at once. And I think the interview with multiple people can have a really great impact because it means that the candidates get to meet a lot of people across the business at once. But it also can be a nightmare to schedule in, which can slow down your process as well. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're sort of looking to replicate those. Is it actually going to work for you is probably a good question. All right, so interview timelines. It made me really nervous to read that this is how long it takes for these processes to happen, because I know it just, with the clients that I'm working with at the moment and the companies I'm working with, if you had a timeline of this long, those candidates are gone. Like, you just couldn't sustain these sort of timelines. So this is what it's looking like at the moment in market. Canva is probably the shortest, with a 3 to 4 week turnaround from application to offer. Atlassian sitting pretty similar, starting at 4 weeks, moving up to 10 in sort of extreme circumstances. And the rest are pretty similar, sitting at anywhere between 5 and sometimes 10 weeks, which 10 weeks is like it's a change of season. You're going from winter to spring in that time. It's crazy. But I think the thing is that sometimes they can actually afford to do that because people are willing to wait to work for these companies. They're willing to stick it out and willing to see it through for these companies. One of the other interesting things that I sort of thought about when looking at these companies is this spectrum of convinced and be convinced. So down on the convinced side of things, it means that you as a hiring manager need to be convinced. No, sorry. You as a hiring manager need to convince the people coming on board that this is the place that they want to work. It's going to advance their career. It's got all the opportunities. On the other side of things, you've got the be convinced side of things, where you need to be convinced that this person is the right person for your company. It's a real spectrum that has an impact on what we see in market at the moment from a talent attraction and retention point of view. And this is where I see it's sitting at the moment. So for tech giants, they're definitely closer to the be convinced side of things. So with the large talent pools that they've got in market at the moment, they don't need to be saying yes to everyone. They can pick and choose and be really considered around their thoughts of which person is right for their business. Whereas if the rest of us who are working in that sort of non-tech giant space, it is about convincing. So it's a two-way street in terms of, yes, they need to, candidates need to give some indication of their technical abilities and, where they sit in market in terms of how they're technically capable. But at the same time, we as hiring managers need to be able to say, no, you definitely do want to work here instead of Google. Here's the reason why, and selling the dream. So convincing is more about selling the dream, and be convinced is about being sold that this person is going to add to the dream. I hope that made sense, but that's sort of like, I guess, my thought behind it. And I'm going to jump into some insights now. And I think the insights should feed into this sort of situation here around, if you're sitting at the very bottom of the sort of be convinced space, the convinced, I should have made it a better name. It's very confusing. If you're sitting at the bottom of the convinced side of things, how can you move that arrow up towards be convinced so that you can get more candidates through the door? You've got more options and more choices, and you can really make the best of, the hiring process that you've got, rather than just having to cling on to whatever candidate comes through the door. So what can you leave behind? My first tip for what you can leave behind is those long timelines. In this market that we're working in at the moment, if you were spending more than 2 weeks, we just can't afford to have 2 weeks between recruitment processes. So that is around waiting from when an application comes in the door to when they have their first interview. There can't be a 2-week gap there. And there also can't be 2 weeks between when they hand back their technical task and their final interview as well. It's just not viable in this market. Having multiple hoops. So I think that there is a fine balance of making sure that you can get all the information you need to make an accurate decision, while also leaving behind unnecessary technical interviews and technical tests. Having huge talent pools. So while it's great to have 100 applications on your desk, the quality of those 100 applications is probably not going to be a case of you needing to do 100 interviews, because you just simply can't decide of which of these amazing candidates you're going to pick. So you need to position yourself so that only the candidates that you want to apply for your role do apply. That comes down to employer branding. It comes down to how you write your job ads, how you position yourself in market, and what you're doing sort of in a networking space as well, to really bring in the right people to your company, rather than anyone who has ever coded anything before. Creating a high barrier of entry for candidates. So we want to leave this behind. It just doesn't work to have a 10-page application process that candidates need to go through to actually just apply for the company. Things like your Googles and your Meta, they will essentially make you regurgitate your CV in form version, and that can be really hard in terms of getting candidates to apply, because they just don't want to. So can you make it quick and simple? Can you have a LinkedIn quick apply, or a Seek portal that they can just upload their resume that's already on file? Those sort of things. And the last thing to consider in terms of leaving behind is you paying for candidates that you can't afford. So essentially, if you've got a candidate on the table who's got 2 years of experience and they're asking for 140K, is that the right candidate for your business? Can you find, that's probably not a good example. So give someone who's got 4 years experience, they're a true mid, asking for that sort of 150K. Alternatively, you could think about bringing on a graduate at 50 to 60K, and at the same time bringing on a true mid-level at sort of 90K. Bringing on those two will equal budget-wise to that sort of 150K. Those numbers probably aren't quite right, so don't quote me on that, but I think conceptually, that's where I'm sitting right now. What can you do better? So, can you grow your own talent? These tech giants a lot of them don't have internships. They don't have graduate programs. Can you invest in graduate programs and paid internships so that you can mature your talent? So that means if you bring in a graduate now, in 2 years' time, you'll have a developer with 2 years experience who knows your company's ways of working. They're quite, switched on in terms of how things work. They've been grown and developed in your way of working. So I think that's something to consider. If you're finding it hard to find that senior talent, can you grow your own? Can you move quickly? So moving with a 2 to 3 week timeline, keeping engagement high is really key. Thinking long term as well. So I think that's what a lot of these companies do really well in terms of growing the talent. Engaging talent in a cyclical way that you come back to that same person 2 years later. Can your candidates meet someone that they wouldn't be able to meet at a tech giant? So a great example of that is the CEO. Can you get your CEO to meet candidates along the way? And if that's not viable, is there someone else high up that they could meet? Say your CTO or your CTPO or your CPO or your COO. Someone in that leadership team to make them feel special and included. And maybe it's a case of you just pull out your CEO for those candidates that you're really, really trying hard to get on board to really sell that dream. Can you find an interesting or candidate-friendly way to test technically? A GitHub show and tell is something that we've seen come up a bit more often these days. And I think what that is about is just using the code that's there. It means that you can move your process along quicker because they're not having to start from scratch. It means that they're showing you code that they've used in an environment that's going to be similar to the way they actually work for the same result in terms of being able to assess their technical capabilities. So that's something I would consider from a technical point of view, but I'm sure there's lots of different interesting ways you can do it. We'll just require a bit of research. And can you lean on the professionals? I don't mean to sell you anything today. It's not what this is about, but some of these tech giants still do rely on recruiters to get talent into their business. And if you are finding the talent shortage challenging for you, there's things that recruiters can do to help you. There's things that employer brand specialists can do to help you as well, to sort of overcome the challenges that you're having and position your brand in a way that's going to resonate with candidates that are in market. 10 implementable takeaways for you today. I've got 10 of them, then we're all done. I'm going to ask the questions at the end. So if you want to ask a question, feel free to pop it in the Q&A now. But number one, in no particular order, build your employer brand. So would I want to work for somewhere that I've never heard of? Probably not. So do your best to solve this problem. Have a process that is seamless and feels special. So spend the time and the budget, if you can, to create a process that is seamless and goes from A to B, focusing on candidate experience. It'll save you a lot of pain down the track if you can really nail down that now, rather than getting to the point where you're hiring 50 to 100 people a year and you're not using, proper process. If you can afford it, I would strongly recommend an ATS. I've always used Job Adder and I love it and it's the best. And if you can get an applicant tracking system, it will save you a lot of pain and it allows you to do so much automation as well. It's amazing. Provide your candidates with multiple opportunities to succeed. Sometimes tech tasks in one particular way don't work for a particular type of candidate. Can you give multiple opportunities for them to sort of show their technical capabilities rather than automatically discounting them if they don't succeed in one particular way that's in a particular box? Set your candidates up for success. So that's around building your career page out to provide all the information that a candidate will need to succeed. So on all these career sites from the tech giants, they've all got information on what the interview process looks like. And that's just a great starting point, so that you go into that process knowing this is what I'm going to be doing, this is how I'm going to be doing it, and I'm not shocked or surprised by how that sort of looks or feels. Number 5, recruit from your user base. I'm sure if you're running a business at the moment, you've probably got some access to your users, whether that is through your email channels or whether it's through your social media. Whatever your database looks like, can you utilize that database to get referrals or direct applicants from people that are using your products? So you don't need to reinvent the wheel to do this, but you do need to know what's at your disposal and be able to use it. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Utilize referrals. So that's within your own company at the moment. Teach people what a referral is. I think it can be a bit of a foreign concept if you're not in HR recruitment. So hold a referral party where you go through LinkedIn to show them this is what this is. Can you message this person? And incentivize it. So provide a monetary value behind what a referral looks like to really engage people in finding the talent. Building out your careers page. So again, making sure you've got a spot where you can sell the dream of what it is like to work in that company. And it also, like, it's just simple things like showing photos of people working in your work environment means that they know this is not a suit and tie environment. It's somewhere that I want to work because I can wear my sneakers every day. I'm not required to wear a suit. It's just simple things like that that you don't think of but are really important. Be a tech company that utilizes technology. So again, invest in an ATS, but also go where your candidates are. So if your candidates are on Twitter or Discord or Twitch or Instagram, use that tech to find your candidates. I know Ben in our team has had a really good time using Discord to find candidates. So they're definitely out there. You've just got to go where they are, essentially, because not everyone's on LinkedIn. I think we forget that. Focus on process and consistency. So making sure that you're setting up the process from the get-go and that it's going to be a positive and memorable experience for your candidates. Make sure you're utilizing templates so that no one gets left behind. So that means that, you know, when someone goes through an interview process with you, they're receiving an email at the end of it to say, here's what happens from here. I think that's really important. And get your leaders to the front. So there's nothing like an inspiring leader to get behind your sort of brand. But yeah, definitely consider whether your CEO or CTO or engineering manager can build up their LinkedIn presence, get on podcasts. You can chat to me at What's the Stack if you want. They can come What's the Stack. We're always looking for new people to come on that. But yeah, there's nothing like an inspirational leader to draw candidates in. So that's probably my final recommendation. So, questions. I've left a QR code there. It goes to my Calendly. If you'd like to get in touch with me for an additional chat on this topic, I'm very happy to have a chat. We can do a coffee, we can do a Zoom, we can do a phone call, whatever suits you. That's my Calendly link. Please go for it. Okay. Where are we going? Okay, how would you go about refining your recruitment process? We don't know where to start. It's really hard, and I've tried to do it before and it was a bit challenging, but I think starting by doing a bit of a whiteboard session about what you want it to look like, working out what you have at your disposal in terms of tech. And I think asking for help is another thing. So I used to sit in a HR group with lots of other HR professionals in tech, and it was a great place to sort of talk about what people are doing and what people are not doing that's not working. So yeah, I think that's a good example of that. Why are people leaving their jobs? What are you seeing? What are we seeing at the moment? I think there was a big shift post-pandemic where people sort of sat in their jobs probably a little bit longer than they would have. And then off the back of that, they have now decided to get up and go. I think salary is still a big reason people are leaving. I think opportunity for growth and development, perks and that sort of thing, flexibility. People are still getting, drawn in by, the shiny objects that is bigger, brighter companies for opportunities. So I think it's not a one size fits all, but it's more about there's lots of things happening in the market at the moment that means people are moving on at the moment. So for sure. You mentioned that Airbnb has a policy where employees can work from anywhere. Just wondering if you could speak to trends around remote work. Do you notice that tech giants embracing remote work more, or are they generally sticking to the office? Does pay change depending on where an employee works, or would an employee get the same regardless of location? I think there is now an expectation around there's an expectation around remote work now and flexibility. So definitely we are seeing that there's no difference in terms of pay. But on top of that, yeah, I would say that there's definitely that expectation. Tech giants are definitely moving more towards remote unless you are working at Tesla. But I think over time, it's hard to say, but I think they will be a movement back into the office at some point. It's just not yet. But salaries generally we're seeing are the same. There's no difference between whether you're working at home or in the office, for sure. As a recruiter, what's a not so obvious red flag that instantly makes you reconsider a potential candidate? I think it's candidates who are a bit not really sure, don't understand their own personal value, or don't understand how they fit into the larger ecosystem. Like if you're sort of setting yourself up to be, you know, a mid-level developer, but you've got 1 year of experience, there's probably a misalignment there. But I think, you know, it's just basic things at the moment, like manners are still a thing that you need to consider. And the best candidates are the ones who are engaged and who are really focused on finding the right role for them and really want to communicate with you as a recruiter or as a hiring manager. So yeah, I hope that helps. And what emerging trends are you seeing of most interest to people? What emerging trends are you most interested in seeing coming up? I think remote work is still interesting, but I think it's still a challenge. I'm really enjoying seeing companies that have got interesting perks. So, you know, I think no longer can we rely on free breakfast and a potential bonus if we all hit targets. Candidates are wanting ESOPs, and they're wanting remote work, and they're wanting, you know, bonuses for equipment to work from home and that sort of thing. So I think perks is something I'm interested in at the moment. But yeah, I'm conscious that we are over time now, and it is 1:34. But if you want to stay in touch, here are my details. Feel free to email me, call me. That's a QR code to my LinkedIn. QR codes is the trend I'm interested in. How we're using them. Who would have thought we had a QR code 2 years ago? But that's it for today. So thank you so much for joining me. If there's anything I can help you with, please get in touch. I'm really enjoyed putting this together. So if I can talk you through any of the insights today or anything that I've presented, I'm more than happy to. But that is it. Have a great day. How do you wrap this up? I will see you around.